night Corbin Ashdale handed Maren Whitfield Okafor the divorce papers, he was smiling. Not the nervous smile of a man who knows he's doing something cruel, the easy, loose smile of a man who believes he's already won. Maren, 38 years old, co-founder of what was once called the most promising sustainable textile company in the Southeast, stood in the kitchen of the house they had shared for 11 years. She was still wearing her work blazer. She hadn't even taken off her shoes. Corbin had apparently been waiting. "I think we both know this has been over for a while," he said. She looked at the envelope. Then she looked at him. "You had someone draw these up," she said. "It wasn't a question. Leland helped me." Leland, his college roommate who had passed the bar 3 years ago and mostly handled DUIs and landlord disputes. Corbin had apparently decided that was sufficient for dissolving an 11-year marriage and untangling a business partnership that had grown to 34 employees and 3 warehouse facilities. Maren set the envelope on the counter. She did not open it. "I'll have my attorney look at these," she said. Corbin blinked. He had expected tears maybe, or argument. The look on his face when he got neither was something she would think about later, in quieter moments, and almost feel sorry about, almost. What Corbin did not know, what he had never bothered to find out, in 11 years of marriage to a woman he consistently underestimated, was that 3 months earlier, Maren had quietly restructured the holding company that sat above their shared business. The restructuring was legal, meticulously documented, and had been recommended by her attorney, a woman named Devorah Kalast, who had been watching the marriage deteriorate from the outside and had advised Maren to protect herself before the conversation she could see coming arrived. Maren had listened. Corbin had not asked. Corbin, in the final year of their marriage, had not asked about much at all. Not the business financials, not the restructuring, not the meetings she took in the evenings, not the attorney's retainer she had quietly moved to her personal account. He was busy. He was distracted. He was spending a significant amount of time with a woman named Felicia Brandt, 31, a marketing consultant who had come in to rebrand their third product line and had apparently decided to rebrand several other things while she was at it. Maren knew about Felicia the way she knew about most things in her life, quietly without announcement and earlier than anyone expected. She had not said anything. She had called Devorah instead. The company was called Threadline. They had started it in a rented studio in Savannah, back when Corbin was still the person she believed him to be, enthusiastic, idealistic, the kind of man who stayed up until 2 in the morning reading about ethical sourcing and carbon-neutral logistics because he genuinely cared, or she had thought he genuinely cared. Looking back, Maren could not always separate the man from the performance of the man, and she had stopped trying. She had been the one with the background in textile manufacturing. Her mother, Claudette Maren Whitfield, had run a small custom fabric business out of their garage in Raleigh, and Maren had grown up threading bobbins and reading order forms before she could ride a bike without training wheels. When she went to study at NC State, she'd majored in materials science and minored in business. And when she graduated, she had spent 4 years working for a mid-size activewear company before she met Corbin at a sustainability conference in Atlanta. He was presenting a paper on ethical supply chains. She was in the audience, noticing the gaps in his sourcing data, but impressed by his delivery. They talked for 3 hours over dinner. They were together within 2 months, married within 2 years, building Threadline within 3. It was Maren who had the supplier relationships. It was Maren who had flown to Vietnam and Portugal and Peru to negotiate contracts, who had designed the quality protocols, who had interviewed and hired the first 12 employees. Corbin had handled the pitch decks and the investor meetings and the public-facing presentation of the company, and he was good at it. Easy in a room, persuasive, the kind of handsome that makes investors feel like they're backing something worth believing in. It had worked. It had worked for 7 years, and then it had started to not work. The exact moment was hard to pin down. Maren had tried during the long months when she was deciding what to do. There was no single crack she could point to, just a slow erosion, the way fabric degrades not from one tear, but from 1,000 small points of friction repeated over time. Corbin had started talking more and listening less. He had started introducing her at industry events as my wife instead of my co-founder. He had started pinging himself on her supplier emails and then responding to them before she could, as if her relationships were interchangeable with his ambition. And then there was Felicia. Felicia had arrived in March with good ideas and expensive shoes and the particular confidence of someone who believes she is the most interesting person in any room she enters. She probably was interesting. Maren did not have strong feelings about Felicia as a person. She had very strong feelings about what Felicia represented, which was a decision Corbin had made, consciously, repeatedly, to choose destruction over the life he had been given. By the time Corbin handed Maren the divorce papers in October, Maren had been meeting with Devora for 3 months. She had restructured the holding company, consolidated her ownership of 2 of the 3 supplier contracts under her personal entity, and done something that no one except Devora and one very careful accountant named Theodore Gaines knew about. She had founded a new company. It was called Woven North. Maren had registered it in Delaware, listed herself as sole owner, and spent 6 weeks negotiating, quietly through intermediaries, a supply and licensing agreement with the same mills in Portugal that had been Threadline's most critical vendor for 5 years. The kind of agreement that, once signed, meant those mills were effectively exclusive to Woven North for the next 36 months. She had not told Corbin. She had not told anyone. The divorce moved faster than either of them expected. Corbin had Leland. Maren had Devora. These were not equivalent forces, and the settlement negotiations revealed this almost immediately. Corbin had assumed, and this was the assumption that would later define his particular tragedy, that the assets were simple. 2 people, 1 company, 1 house, some equipment. He assumed the split would be roughly equal. He assumed Maren would be cooperative, because she had always been cooperative. Because cooperation was the thing she did, the way water flows toward the lowest point, not from weakness, but from understanding where things naturally lead. He did not understand that this time she had decided to lead elsewhere. The settlement was reached in January, 4 months after the papers were served. The house went to Corbin, his idea, his insistence, and Maren had not fought it because she did not want the house. She wanted the supplier relationships. She wanted the vendor files. She wanted the 2 employees who handled quality control and whom she had personally trained over 4 years. Devora got her all 3. Corbin got the brand name, the existing inventory, and the warehouse facilities. He got the pitch decks and the investor relationships and the public-facing presentation of the business. He got, in other words, the things he was good at and the things he believed mattered most. Maren got the infrastructure. She moved into a smaller apartment in Charleston, 2 miles from the harbor, and she did not spend a single night crying about the house or the marriage or the years she had given to both. She was not unfeeling. She was precise. There is a difference, and it is important. Woven North opened its doors, quietly, with no press release, in February. What happened next unfolded over 8 months, and the people who watched it happen from the outside would later describe it as either justice or inevitability, depending on how charitable they were feeling about Corbin. Without the supplier relationships, Threadline's production costs climbed. The Portuguese mills, now under contract with Woven North, could not fulfill Threadline's new orders at the old price points. Corbin brought in a new sourcing manager, a man named Pace Donnelly, who was efficient but did not have Maren's relationships. The replacement suppliers Pace found were slower, more expensive, and 2 of them had the kind of labor practice gaps that Threadline's early branding had specifically positioned itself against. An investigative piece in a sustainability trade magazine pointed this out in May. Corbin managed the fallout badly. He sent a reactive statement that satisfied no one. He blamed the supply chain disruption on post-pandemic volatility, which was not entirely false, but was not the reason, and the people who knew the industry could tell. Investors started calling. Some of them were the same investors Maren had pitched alongside him in 2018, and some of them called her now to ask questions. She answered their questions. She did not say anything unkind about Corbin. She described Woven North's structure, its supplier relationships, its commitment to the sourcing standards that had built the category in the first place. She let the work speak. By June, 2 of Threadline's largest retail partners had opened conversations with Woven North. Corbin found out in July. He called her. "I heard you're talking to Nordstrom Rack," he said. "Yes," she said. A pause. "Maren, I'm in a meeting," she said. "I'll have my assistant reach out." She did not have her assistant reach out. She was back in a meeting before the call ended, and the meeting was with a buyer from one of those retail partners, and the conversation went very well. What Corbin had not accounted for, could not have accounted for, because he had not paid attention, was that Maren had been building Woven North's runway long before the divorce was finalized. She had spent those 8 months after the settlement not recovering, but executing. She had hired with the precision of someone who had made expensive hiring mistakes before, and learned from every one of them. She brought in a logistics director from a competitor, a woman named Isolde Harker, who had spent 15 years in ethical sourcing and who understood, instinctively, what Maren was building and why. She hired 2 of the quality control employees she had trained at Threadline. The settlement permitted this. Devora had made sure of it. She brought in a brand consultant who was not Felicia Brandt, and whose work was quieter and more precise and reached the right people without announcing itself. She did not appear in any profiles. She did not give any interviews. She ran the company from a converted warehouse space near the harbor, and she arrived before anyone else, and left after most of them, and on Sundays she went back to the small apartment, and she cooked the same simple meals she had always cooked, and she called her mother in Raleigh, and she was, by every measure that mattered, fine. Not fine the way people say they're fine when they are not. Fine in the sense of a recalibration completed, a compass that had been knocked off course, slowly over years, finding its true north again and settling there. Woven North's first major profile appeared in September, in a trade publication that covered sustainable manufacturing in the American South. The headline described it as the company quietly reshaping ethical textiles from the Carolina coast. A photograph accompanied the article, Marin in the warehouse speaking to two employees, not posed, not smiling at a camera, just working. The article mentioned in the second paragraph that Marin was the former co-founder of Threadline. Corbin called again the same day the article ran. She did not answer. The phone call she did take, the one that she would later describe as the moment when the story she had been living became the story she had survived, came in October, exactly 1 year after Corbin had handed her the envelope in the kitchen while she was still wearing her shoes. The caller was a man named Vickers Aldrin, 61, managing partner of Aldrin Shaw Capital, one of the two original investors in Threadline. He had backed them in 2018 with a commitment that, at the time, had felt enormous and now felt like the first domino in a sequence she was still watching fall. "I'll be direct," said. "We're divesting from Threadline. We think the fundamentals are compromised and the brand recovery is going to take longer than Corbin believes. We've been watching what you've built in Charleston." Marin was standing at her office window looking at the harbor. "What would you like to know?" she said. "Everything," he said. She told him. She was not modest and she was not performative. She gave him the financials, the supplier agreements, the retail pipeline, the headcount projections, the 3-year model that Theodore Gaines had helped her build. She spoke for 40 minutes and answered every question, and at the end Vickers said, "We'd like to meet in person this week if possible." "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," he said. The meeting was in Atlanta, in the same building where the sustainability conference had been held 12 years earlier, though she did not mention this, and the coincidence either meant something or it meant nothing, and she had stopped assigning meaning to things that did not require it. Vickers brought 2 partners. Marin brought Devora and Theodore, and because she trusted her instincts about people. The presentation took 90 minutes. The questions afterward took another hour. At the end, Vickers leaned back in his chair and looked at the growth projections and said, "You've already signed the Portuguese mills." "Exclusively," she said, "through 2027. Vickers looked at his partners. His partners looked at each other. One of them, a younger woman named Sawase Penn, who had not said much during the meeting but had been writing things down steadily, tapped her pen on the table and said, "And Threadline's contract with the same mills expired when?" "Last December," Marin said. The room was quiet for a moment. "Who knew about the exclusivity clause?" Vickers asked. "My attorney, my accountant, the mills themselves." She paused. "And now you." Saris wrote something else down. Aldrin Shaw committed to the investment the following week. The term sheet arrived on a Tuesday, and when Marin read it, she sat for a long time in the quiet of her office, not because the numbers surprised her. She had modeled it, had known what the company was worth, but because the moment felt significant in a way she wanted to sit inside of before she moved past it. She called her mother. "They came in," she said. Her mother said, "Of course they did." In November, Threadline filed for a structured restructuring, not bankruptcy but close enough that the industry trade press covered it as a cautionary tale. The headline in one publication read, "Sustainable Textile Pioneer Struggles to Find Footing After Leadership Split." The article quoted Corbin twice. It did not quote Marin. She read it once and did not read it again. What the article did not know, because no one had told them, was that Aldrin Shaw's divestment from Threadline had been partly funded by their investment in Woven North, the company that Marin had built, brick by brick. During the same months, Corbin had been operating under the assumption that he had the better half of the settlement. He had the house. He had the brand name. He had Felicia, who had quietly departed in August, after the trade magazine piece, after the retail partner conversations began, after the shape of things became visible to anyone paying attention. Marin had the mills. The moment she heard about came secondhand through Isyol, who had a contact at the commercial real estate firm handling the potential sale of Threadline's warehouse facilities. Corbin had sent a letter, an actual letter apparently, handwritten, to Marin's business address. Not a legal document, not a request filtered through attorneys, a letter. Isyol brought it to her on a Wednesday morning in December, 1 year and 2 months, after the divorced papers had been handed over in a kitchen While Marin was still wearing her shoes, she read it standing up. It was 4 paragraphs long. The first paragraph opened with, "I've been thinking a lot." The second paragraph included the phrase, "I didn't understand what I had." The third paragraph said, approximately, that he had made a mistake and that he hoped they could find a way to speak. The fourth paragraph said he was sorry. Marin folded the letter in half and then in half again. She thought about the conference in Atlanta 12 years ago, the gaps in his sourcing data, the dinner that lasted 3 hours. She thought about the studio in Savannah and the first time they had a real order, and the way he had hugged her like the world had just rearranged itself into something worth believing in. She thought about the kitchen, the smile. She put the letter in the top drawer of her desk, and she turned back to the email she had been composing before Isyol came in, which was to the logistics director of a regional department store chain that was interested in carrying Woven North's spring line. She finished the email, she sent it. She did not write back to Corbin. Not because she was angry. The anger had metabolized into something quieter and more durable. But because there was nothing to say that the year hadn't already said more clearly than she could have said it in words. She had not set out to ruin him. She had not planned for his failure. She had planned for her own survival and then her own success, and those two things had turned out to be sufficient. The world has a way of revealing what things are actually worth once you stop letting other people appraise them for you. Marin Whitfield Okafor, 39, founder and CEO of Woven North, went back to work.